safe.
Just as Control blurs the lines between the conscious and unconscious worlds, reality and the astral plane, the heavy-hitting action and the dreamlike moments, the game often crosses between the fantastic and the not-so-good. With some more time to iron out some of the blemishes the game has, it could have risen from its current state into something truly incredible. Perhaps originally seen as the spiritual successor to Remedy's previous game Quantum Break, there are enough differences for players who didn't like Remedy's previous game to definitely give Control a chance. For others who thought Quantum Break was fantastic, Control may give you a similar feeling or make you feel underwhelmed. As players enter the Federal Bureau of Control, they will be taken on an action-oriented ride, complete with paranormal abilities, all the while being wrapped up in a slightly confusing, dense, and thought-provoking story that warrants further investigation and research. Set in a location that is cold, mysterious, and intriguing, this is a review of Control by Remedy Games. First up, let's talk about the technical aspects of the game, and I want to begin with my biggest complaint about the game, and that's in its performance. After having completed Control on the Xbox One X, I immediately thought to myself that I feel sorry for anyone that must be playing this on the base consoles. Even on the Xbox One X, the game could regularly feel a little sluggish, whether that was due to the game dropping frames or having an inconsistent frame pacing. In real-world terms, there was an impact to the game's performance that, in the most severe of cases, could really take away from the overall experience. I wouldn't go so far as to say it was unplayable, but it's disappointing to see that the issues weren't fixed before the game's release. The problem was exacerbated if I was taking on multiple enemies at once in one of the larger areas with a multitude of effects and explosions all happening at once. There were several times I can easily remember where aiming became more difficult than it needed to be due to the drop in performance. Hopefully this can be patched fairly quickly, even for the more powerful consoles, but seeing a performance increase for the base systems is urgently needed. I also ran into slowdown when it came to looking at the map, going in and out of the menus, and when recording footage for this very video, which I haven't experienced in other games. After several hours of playtime, I made sure only to ever pause the game when nothing was happening, as when I would go to unpause and move my character around, there would be huge judders in the image with the frame rate tanking for a couple of seconds before it would become more stable. This problem would also occur upon death, and once I respawned, the same judders would occur. And speaking of the load times, they can feel a little on the long side when waiting to respawn, but it wasn't something that affected my experience or overall impression of the game all too much. And these performance-related problems are disappointing in an otherwise overall very good-looking game. Playing on console, I wasn't able to experience the ray tracing which PC players are blessed with, but I will note that the game does not support HDR for some reason either, but even with that, colours and the lighting, especially, is extremely impressive. Many games out there have impressive lighting, but the very best use of lighting, in my opinion, is when it is used effectively to create a certain atmosphere to really bring an environment to life, and Control delivers this in a big way. Seeing as the Federal Bureau of Control is simply a huge, modern-day building cluttered with office desks, filing cabinets and other assorted bits and pieces, there isn't really anything that really pops out at the player to impress them. And this is where the lighting and effects deliver. Seeing your main character in the dimly lit environments get bathed in this atmospheric glow really contributes to the tone of the game and sets the scene for the intriguing storyline the game is trying to tell. Now, those wanting a straightforward, easily digestible and neatly tied up story will be disappointed, as throughout playing the game, I got a feeling that Control revels in the obscurity and in answering questions with other questions. Some gamers I find will completely zone out of the story altogether, whilst others will lap it up like drinking water in the desert. There are a number of cutscenes between different characters which give players new information, and this is also gained from the main character Jessie, who often will self-narrate what is happening or telling us what she's thinking. If players are to piece together and fully understand what is going on, though, then these alone won't be enough. The environment is littered with documents which players can find and read, which will give greater detail and insight into the characters who work at the Bureau, what it is they are or were working on, and any problems they encountered. Projectors will also be found with videos which further explain the history of the Bureau and side missions, which will give you more information when trying to piece together the puzzle that is Control's story. In terms of the characters in Control, I didn't find any were really fleshed out enough or were interesting enough for me to care all that much apart from Jesse and perhaps one other. They get the job done when it comes to moving the story along or giving Jesse information when needed or dishing out tasks and missions to do, but the main problem with them could be just how the game is designed. These characters are mostly confined to certain areas in the same spot, with some exceptions for the majority of the game. It never feels like they are in any sort of danger, and in being so stagnant, they come across as one-dimensional characters in a video game. One important point of interest when it came to the story and the overall lore and feel of Control was the inclusion of the Ocean View Motel. Without delving into anything you do there or its role or importance, I found it to be a fantastic inclusion. The mystery surrounding it and how it fits together with other locations was incredibly interesting, even though it still raised more questions than answers by the time the credits rolled. As players make their way through the roughly 10 to 15 hour main campaign, control points can be unlocked to make fast travel around this interconnected environment much easier, and they also act as respawn points from when your character dies. There are quite a number of them, but players will still be required to run back to where they died in order to continue on. This didn't bother me too much, and any place I needed to go back to didn't take long to get there. This made life easier when I started doing more of the side missions especially. There is no visible marker as you play telling you which way to go to reach an objective, and with the problems associated with bringing up the map, the fast travel option was a blessing. The entire environment is quite connected, so you can run between areas if you wish, although I didn't find it was on the same level or as interesting as a game like Dark Souls, even though it is similar, whereby you can also open doors later on which link back to previous areas. If you're into exploring a lot of the environment, then the game will cater towards you, as it has quite a number of places for you to discover. When traversing the environment, gamers will have several abilities at your disposal, and also to help fight the enemies as well. Before diving into the abilities and the gameplay, I will mention that I wanted more different types of enemies to go up against. It often felt like I was killing the same ones over and over again, and the enemies aren't all that interesting to begin with. I often felt the same way with a number of the boss battles, especially the ones during the main missions. There was really nothing all that interesting about them, which was disappointing. A bullet sponge boss, often with other enemies spawning in, and that's really it. And that's a shame, as there are several side mission bosses that are quite well done and much more interesting. But now onto the abilities. Players will unlock several different abilities during playtime, with the first ones being that of launch and dodge. Picking up and launching objects at enemies, as well as quickly dodging to the side to avoid those enemies, and gunfire. Using these abilities will drain energy, and once it's gone, then it takes a small amount of time to recharge, and managing this during a tense battle is what makes the battles fun, but also gives some much needed depth to combat instead of players being able to constantly use their abilities repeatedly. Players can also unlock a shield and the ability to overtake enemies when they're weak for them to fight for you. Throughout my playthrough, I used these abilities much less than others. I tended to favour a more aggressive approach to combat, so the shield didn't fit with this playstyle too much. In terms of taking control of enemies so they fight alongside you, to use this effectively meant taking cover behind an object to shield myself from gunfire, as using this takes a short amount of time, which leaves you vulnerable if you're out in the open. Now, one of the best abilities is that of levitation, which sees players almost flying over enemies in the environment, and this opens up the combat much more. This made it harder for enemies to hit me and made moving around the environment easier, especially when it came to getting to safety or finding another place, which gave myself an advantage over those enemies. The criticism of levitation is that it comes towards the end of the game. It can be used to get to out of reach areas which may have been discovered earlier, but I would have liked to see more instances throughout the game where it could have been used in different ways. Whether that be through puzzle solving or it being more of a necessity in navigating the environment. An example of this happens later in the game, and this is just one reason why it's perhaps one of the greatest levels or gameplay segments that I've played in years, and is Control at its absolute best, but I don't want to spoil anything. I wouldn't call Control a difficult game, provided you spend the time to gain ability points through missions and side activities, but it isn't a pushover either. There was a certain point towards the end of the game which I replayed probably a dozen times as I was getting killed or falling off the ledges. Some of these deaths I attributed to the performance issues of the game, as I would hit frame rate issues which occurred in the more open environment and the spawning in of a large number of enemies. This section was also one which went against other areas of the game for some reason. Players would make their way through a few different stages, but if you're killed, you respawn at the control point to do the entire segment again. Now, needing to replay areas isn't a big deal in games, but if this was to be the case, then it should have been a design choice from the very opening of the game. This particular area also felt like it dragged on more than necessary. All the parts of Control come together to create a whole that shows off its brilliance at one moment, but then goes and shows off its issues and problems the next. Control is at its absolute best when engaged in combat with several enemies when you're sufficiently leveled up, or when you're pondering the story later in the game when much more information is available to you. But then there are those times when the performance really lets the game down and you're reminded that beneath this enigmatic world and story lies a piece of interactive media that has its technical problems. From regular dropped frames, especially on weaker hardware, to texture popping and heavy stuttering when using the map or when respawning, Control is only let down by its own, mostly avoidable problems. Sure, the characters may be lacking in personality and the environment can lack variety, but even with these, Control is a fun action game that wants you to delve into its story and lore as you try to unravel its mystery. But its performance problems may turn some gamers off, whilst others give up on the story due to its vagueness and delivery.